Well, hello all. Good to see so many. Hello. Good to see so many wonderful, familiar faces and new friends I can see. University of Georgia, we are fortunate to have GCDD funding for the Training and Technical Assistance Center. And some of our provider agencies, there's Matthew Barnes and others. Glad to have them on the call, and we're able to provide training and technical assistance and site visits and as much as we can help because of the GCDD funding. I am joined by the best team in Georgia. I know you may say, nope, I got the best team. That's okay. But today, when I'm talking about the team, I'm talking about the core advancing employment team, Dr. Tracy Rackensberger, Amy Price, and Joseph Harrison. I don't know if Whitney is on with us, but our planning committee knows that Whitney has done an outstanding job with our graphics, not only representing all the partners, but specifying each week in a graphic that shows us our theme. So we're excited. As if you're new to us, we like to be informal. We like to have fun and laugh and work hard. So if that's something you're interested in, please know that you may raise your hand anytime to be unmuted. We will keep you muted as we're holding the session, just to keep that background noise down. As well, you can type and chat, whatever you would like. And of course, we are recording. Mr. Joseph does a great job of archiving these webinars, and you can see them from last year. Let me just say something really quickly. 18 months ago, Georgia did not have a formalized NDEAM, National Disability Employment Awareness Month initiative. Many of us have sent things around. We may have ordered posters, may have even tried to get a proclamation here and there. But that's very different from doing this in an organized way, in a way that brings more clarity, more focus, and therefore more awareness to disability and employment in Georgia. We thank you all for joining us today. Joseph, I keep hearing a little background. I don't know who that is. But Joseph will use his mafia-like skills to mute you. Not because we don't love you, but just because we need the bandwidth. To that end, guys, I am going to take my camera off. I don't want to, because I want to show off my bow tie and my pocket square. But I'm going to take it off so it's much clearer. Joseph, can you see who that is and maybe mute them, please? Thank you. All right. Hey, Joe, I just saw your chat. Good afternoon to you, my friend. Some of you know that in Advancing Employment, we're all about intention and trying to do things that are creative. And most of you are, I think, on board to do that too, I believe. One way that we do that is kind of setting the tone. And I love to read. I love particularly quotes. And so Google this person after I have read you the quote. It is William Merritt Chase. William Merritt Chase. Here's the quote. Diversity is not polite accommodation. Instead, diversity is, in action, the sometimes painful awareness that other people, other races, other voices, other habits of mind have as much integrity of being, as much claim on the world as you do. And I urge you, amid all the differences present to the eye and mind, to reach out to create the bond that will protect us all. We are meant to be here together. I was really struck by this quote because you heard accommodation, you heard awareness. This quote could be maybe the subtext for NDEAM 2022's theme, which is diversity, equity, inclusion plus disability. All right, who found it? Who found William Merritt Chase? And if you found who that was, tell us real quick. And while you're doing that, Mr. Wilbur, I would love to connect you with Maria Pinkleton at GCDD. There's something we want to chat with you about around tech. Thank you, Miss Dudley. A painter from Indiana. What year was that? Does anybody know what year that was, or the range of years that might have been? You know, we're giving away a couple books, so chime in here. Yes, thank you, Bernard. Yes, look at that. 1849 to 1960. Does it strike you that that language almost entirely holds up today? I find that fascinating. Find it fascinating. Say the first line and the last line one more time. Diversity is not polite accommodation. We are meant to be here together. We are meant to be here together today on this call and on this Zoom and our series that we've lined up for you. I want to thank all of the partners that are listed on the banner. I won't go through each one, but we started meeting back in the spring. And these are all folks who have big jobs, lots to do, lots of priorities. And my heart is always touched by the leadership of this group to show up, to take on tasks that is just additional work for them. It is absolutely true that the state ADA coordinator's office, Stacy and Cheryl Ann, really launched this last year. Now they're going to say I did or Joseph did or Whitney, but the truth is they had all the social capital. They opened up invitations to other people that were so crucial that we did not know. They've gotten proclamations that we could never have gotten on our own. And Stacy and Cheryl Ann, before I turn it over to you at the State ADA Coordinator's Office to talk about your own NDEAM activities, I want to thank you both very, very much. Take it away.
Thank you, Doug. We appreciate the kudos, and of course we could not have done any of this without your leadership. So we appreciate all that you have done for Georgia and for individuals with disabilities and for the citizens of the state. So we appreciate you and everybody in the committee that has worked with us over the last few years. So in terms of what we have done at the State ADA Coordinator's Office for NDEAM, I'm going to talk about a few things that we've done, and then Cheryl Ann Frazier, who is the Assistant State ADA Coordinator, she's going to talk about some other things that we've done. One of the things that we did do is, first off the bat, when they were available, we ordered the posters for this year for our office, and we had them sent to us. And if anybody's interested in ordering posters from the Department of Labor, they are free of charge. You can go on there and click the ones that you want, and they send them to you pretty quickly. So we got the posters in our office, and then so in this past week, at the end of September, we went around our office space and we made sure we had posters in all of the communal areas within our building that we share with our colleagues here at GISBIC, the State Properties Commission, and the Georgia Building Authority. So we made sure we placed them all around the building space, and then we also took pictures of ourselves in front of these posters or near these posters and where we displayed them. And then we sent an email to all of the state agency ADA coordinators for the state of Georgia asking them to participate in a similar manner. So we shared the photos, we asked them to order the posters, we asked them to share the information on their website and with their listservs, and to really support in one of the things that we did, or a kind of combination of things that we've done. We have also recently presented at the Georgia Council for Human Resources. They had a training recently, or they had a meeting recently, and we provided a Title I, which is the employment aspect of ADA, Title I ADA training to all of the members who are members of Georgia Council for Human Resources. And so we explained the importance of Title I and the ADA. And then at the end of our training, we also shared information about NDEAM, and we encouraged all the attendees to participate this month with us, and all year long. So that is another way that we have been working. I also want to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that we've done in our office. So I'm going to mute and turn it over to Cheryl.
Thank you, Stacy. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Doug, for this opportunity to participate with the Georgia Coalition on a National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So one of the things that we have done, and we're very proud of, is that we have created the ADA Informer, which is a newsletter that comes out quarterly. And within this newsletter, we give great tips for ADA Title I, ADA Title II, and also news updates regarding Americans with Disabilities Act. This month, October 2022, we featured NDEAM throughout our newsletter, and we hope that you all will get a copy and subscribe to our newsletter so that you can receive that information quarterly. Again, we appreciate all of our partners and your input during this time. Inside of the ADA Informer this month, we also have a featured interview with Mr. Doug Crandell, and we are very proud of that. And he's very passionate about not only NDEAM, but also state as a model employer. So please make sure that you subscribe to our newsletter, and we hope that Joseph will share it with you after this meeting so that you can put your hands on it, or your eyes on it, because it's virtual, but also it's electronic rather, but also share it with your colleagues and your friends, because we need to get the word out concerning the Americans with Disabilities Act. Although we're 32 years since its signing, we have a long way to go. Finally, we also participate, as Doug mentioned when he opened, we participated in gathering some proclamations to commemorate and recognize NDEAM. And although we appreciate the proclamations, we encourage and need action in this area. So this is something that we're talking to not only local officials, but county officials, city officials, and state officials, so that they can be a part of the action of ensuring that we have equal access for all individuals regarding employment and a fair and equal wage. So we appreciate all of you all being here today. And Doug, thank you so much for allowing us to work with you. The State ADA Coordinator's Office team loves you, and we're so excited to be partnering with you on this very special occasion.
Well, I know some of you are saying, well, Stacy and Cheryl Ann and Doug and the rest are just praising one another. It's because we really respect each other. None of this work can be done in a vacuum. And I only wish in my 26 years in Georgia, I would have started partnering with these guys a lot sooner. We have some great opportunities coming up. Some things are aligning. GCDD last week held the candidates forum. State as model employer was included from 2, maybe 3 of the candidates. So was equal access to self-employment and entrepreneurship. Some of the policy imperatives that we have developed as a group. If you're not familiar with those, if you go to the advancingemployment.com website, they're the kind of the front-facing part of that homepage. You can see all 8 of those policy imperatives, and that guides a lot of our work. I just want to say too that the ADA Informer is so well done And not just because Cheryl Ann interviewed me. I'm talking about, I use it as a resource all the time. Between the ADA Informer and Dr. Rackensberger's Advancing Employment newsletter, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find pertinent information anywhere else, not just with webinars, but work that we're doing from bills that are in the House and Senate in DC to legislative initiatives here in Georgia. Remember, public policy is important. Anybody read any of Dr. Cornell West? Dr. Cornell West is an American treasure. I'm going to paraphrase a quote that he often uses, and it goes something like, justice is what love looks like in public. And I would add to that maybe that under justice, public policy is what love looks like in public. If you've not read Dr. West, I think you'd love some of the many books he's written. He's really a thought leader. But that brings us to really the reason that we decided to initiate and convene a formalized approach to NDEAM in Georgia. And that is, there's a lot of work to do. Here's some of the hard facts that are important to understand. One, GVRA, Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, only recently was able to come out of order of selection. Since 2015, we've given tens of millions of dollars back to the feds. We need to do a better job with that. And that is not a GVRA piece only. It's how we advocate. It's how we make sure that we get our elected officials to set aside state money that can be matched so that we're not giving that money back to other states. Another hard fact is that while the Employment First Act has passed in Georgia, the Employment First Council Committee has not met for 2 years at least. And that's where all these policy imperatives can be enacted. Those are the two tough things that we need to stay cognizant of this month and beyond. But NDEAM is a way to simply bring awareness. And we're going to do that in a variety of ways. This week is disability and economics, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a slide deck related to that. And then we're going to open it up and get folks' opinion on what we should be focusing on for Georgia related to economics and disability. We have a Carter Center event this year, which we are super excited about. We'll tell you a little more about that. I think you have till Friday to let Joseph know if you're attending. It's an invitation only, not because we're being elite, but because we have a shoestring budget and we could only afford some minor pastries and coffee for maybe 50 folks. But we're going to be doing some cool stuff there, trying to get some media attention to it, and then a little surprise that we have in store as well. So this is Disability and Economics Week. Next week is Employer-Employee Stories, and Amy Price is going to be spearheading that. The third week is solely dedicated to state as model employer, as Cheryl Ann and Stacy mentioned. We want to adopt that, and we are so lucky to have the counterpart to the state ADA coordinator's office in Georgia from Louisiana, Ricky David, joining us to talk about how Louisiana went from an executive order around state as model employer to full legislation. That's important because we have in store a lot of work around public-private partnerships. That's just a fancy way to say that government can lead and private industry is more than willing to join along and help solve some of these problems. Okay, Joseph is going to pull up the PowerPoint. I won't belabor this too much because I want to get all of your input, and we do want to talk about some of the resources that are on the Advancing Employment website for this week's theme, Disability and Economics. So Joseph, let's pull that up, and then after that we'll look at the white paper real quick. while Joseph is doing that, anybody feel moved to speak? Please unmute and let us know. Raise your hand. We'll check chat as well. My goodness, there's a lot of chat I haven't been checking. Looks like we have some questions that have been answered by Joseph on the posters. Let's see. Yep, and Joseph has popped in the NDEAM website for you all as well. Okay, let's get to it. So here we are, disability and economics. Most of us get a little scared when we talk about economics. Some of you have gone through our ACRE curriculum, the Association on Community Rehabilitation Educators curriculum. And one of the first things we say is your work is economic development. It is absolutely true. Don't be afraid of economics. Don't think you have to have an MBA to understand economics. And just like all politics are local, so are economics. And we really wanted to dedicate a week around this. And Joseph has curated a tab on the Advancing Employment website to capture a lot of the resources. But this is where we will run through the policy imperatives. Every one of the 8 policy imperatives are connected to economics. In fact, number 8 is totally focused on employment first and a blueprint for the next 10 years around employment in Georgia and disability. So we're going to take this awareness month and really kind of build that out, starting with a little presentation here. So next slide, Joseph. All right. So Dr. Samara, some of you have seen this before, and I'm always impressed when someone actually uses it. Dr. Samara was a job coach, a special education teacher, then a PhD. He works at Kent State University, and arguably over the last decade or so, he's put out, I think, some of the best research around our work. And I always tell people, if you know this figure that we're looking at here, why isn't it on your brochure? Why isn't it something your board knows? Are job developers using this in engaging employers? Do our county commissions and city councils understand this? What Dr. Samara did here was something very different than what we normally do in human services, particularly disability and employment. And that is, we turn around and kind of become solely focused on what I call a little bit of whining advocacy. And what I mean by that is everybody circles the wagons. We don't want cuts to services, and that's important. It's very important. But there are different audiences for different messages. And we've been solely focused on kind of our internal audience when employment is an economic agreement, right? So what did he find here? What did Dr. Samara find? Well, he looked at what is known as RSA 911 data. That's Rehabilitation Service Administration data. Sharon DeMille on the call and others from GVRA will know what that is. But he really looked at what does it mean for a taxpayer, not for a provider agency, not for a family, and by the way, not even for a job seeker with disabilities. This is all about taxpayers. And he found that by using supported employment, helping people get to work quickly. Now remember, this isn't 9/11 data that's attached to readiness, assessments, all the other stuff that we do. Supported employment, just like customized employment, means you go to work where you want to and we support you. There's no getting ready. That's what it was always intended to be. And what he found was every time we do that, we return to taxpayers per supported employee over $3,000 a year every year. Why wouldn't you want your board to know that, your elected officials to know that? Should be part of all of our discussions. Return to taxpayer is important. because that's what we're asking. We're asking for services and supports to be underwritten by all of us. We're all taxpayers. So $3,000 per year to taxpayers per person. So here's a challenge. For 2023, as this wonderful coalition continues to work together, let's share this information. Let's talk about it with our board. Some of you may not know, if you're provider organizations, even if you're not a advancing employment provider that's getting our technical assistance, we are always open to helping you present this kind of data to your board, to chambers of commerce, to the Kiwanis Club, whoever needs to hear it, city councils. We do it everywhere. It's important. Now, Dr. Samara went ahead and kind of extrapolated some of this. And this has become even more important. I don't know how many of you are aware, but on September 28th, President Biden mentioned subminimum wages specifically. There is a bill in Congress, in the House, called HR 2373, called the Competitive Integrated Employment Act, the transformation to competitive integrated employment. So what Samara found is $1.5 billion in cost benefits to taxpayers for those who are currently in segregated services. It's hard to get a return to taxpayers when someone's not working in the community. So Joseph did a great job of kind of breaking this down in an infographic. He's going to sometime here put the NDEAM tab on the website, where you'll also see the disability and economics. All of this is there. You can access it, download it, use it however you want. And we would just encourage you, reach out to us. Let us help you. We can do lots of things through the University of Georgia, not the least of which is convening, right? What I mean by that is using the UGA footprint to engage elected officials locally and economies. This is a great figure. Hey, any comment about this this figure, this piece of data? Any questions or comments before we go on to the next? Joseph has put in the disability and economics tab there in chat, so bookmark that if you will. Amy says, I think this should be part of the conversations with potential employers, right? I don't know why we don't use it more. I was recently in Rhode Island, and one provider agency presents this to the board with one message, and that message is, we put 9 people to work in Providence this month, right? You can easily get up to about 30,000 bucks there with 9 folks in terms of taxpayers' return on investment. Then they, to Amy's point, they present it to employer trade groups so that the issue is not something of pity, but of using all talents, all gifts, and not requiring people to get ready to do that. It's our biggest flaw in our systems, is that we require folks with disabilities who want to go to work to be perfect, but we're not, right? Disability is natural. It is part of the human existence and should be reflected in the workforce, i.e. the reason this year's NDEAM theme is DEI plus disability. Okay. Joseph, next slide, my friend. All right. You know, when I found this one, I was pretty shocked. And just a little note here, later on, we're going to ask you about what do you think we should focus on as a community of practice related to economics and disability in Georgia. Don't let that scare you. Economics is not, yes, we all had to take it either in high school or college, and it was pretty brutal. But economics in real life is stuff like we're covering now. Return on investment, purchasing power. Look at this one. So this shows that households with a member with intellectual disability label represent 31 billion in buying power annually. But they also found that there's over a 7% addition to that with households that have someone who lives outside of that parental home, if that's the case. And that's another 35 billion, giving us a total of 68 billion in collective buying power. Now, why care about that? I'm a job developer in Albany. I run one of the VR field offices in North Georgia. Why care about 68 billion? Because that's the language, like return on investment, that actually engages industry, that actually gets them to perk up and listen to what we're doing. Some of you have heard me say that I have a brother who sometimes calls us you people. Mostly calls us you people because his sister, my sister too, has had some good services and supports around employment, and she's had quite a bit of bad ones. And he loves this kind of information, but he's also pretty dismissive of our programs. He'll say, no one cares about your programs or your little brochure or your card. We care about economics. And leading with return on investment, the prior slide, and this 68 billion in purchasing power can do a lot to get a message to a different audience. Cheryl Ann in the ADA Informer covered a meeting that we went to the end of August at the aquarium called the Mega Meeting, which is several trade groups in the architectural, engineering, and built environment construction field. And I don't know, 300 plus folks. And we were blown away by the interest. The title of the session was, Workforce Woes, Purposeful Recruiting and Retention in the Built Environment. They were totally open to accommodations and customization. They wouldn't be, though, if we didn't talk their language. It was a wonderful event. And for 2023, we are going to do everything we can in Georgia to continue the focus on disability and economics, and in addition to what we're doing with our provider organizations and training and technical assistance. All right, let's look at this third slide, because what we did was we moved from something as simple as return on investment to purchasing power. In this next slide, we'll get at something called the Disability Equality Index. This is pared down. You can Google this. We can send you the full report. So this is really interesting because this can scare us, right? 1 trillion. Whoa. I mean, 66 billion is a lot of money, but 1 trillion you can't even conceive of. But this really came out of 2 states, Oregon and New York. And every state has kind of a state accountant. It's called a comptroller, the state comptroller, state accountant. And a lot of their work, there's some forecasting that goes into that and some other metrics. But a big part of that role is managing retirement accounts, pensions, that kind of thing. And so what these 2 comptrollers in those 2 states did was they really communicated to their portfolio, look, we care about access for folks with disabilities. And we're calling on the investors in our portfolios to set goals for hiring people with disabilities and to track that progress. That's 100 trillion in estimated value in those 2 states' portfolios. Public support, in addition to setting those goals and hiring, public support from a senior leadership position, creating a disability-focused resource group that fosters a supportive network. That's huge. The first one is, if you don't have folks working, if it's not diverse, and including disability, set those goals. And after you've done that, or maybe you already have, are you making sure that there is a group that fosters support for workers with disabilities in that workplace? And these are Fortune 500 or international 500 companies that we're talking about related to this 1 trillion. And then finally, and this isn't all of it, guys, we just tried to pare it down, but including people with disabilities in their corporate diversity and inclusion statements. All of this was before, as a country, we had an awakening and started talking about DEI, and certainly before we had the NDEAM theme, DEI plus disability. $3,000 per supported employee every year, $68 billion in purchasing power just of households with members with intellectual developmental disability. That goes up to about 240 billion if you include physical disabilities only. And then this 1 trillion in the way that corporations are viewing their role in diversity and inclusion. These three are great to use. We'll be sending out and posting some more stuff this week around disability and economics. But this is a set of tools that we don't often use. Next slide, Joseph. Won't go through all of these. Some of you have taken the ACRE course, know that we spend some time on this. In 2016, we were asked as part of 3 areas of the United States by USDOL to convene employer focus groups. And we did that in the Southeast at Georgia Tech. And these were all employers that had already provided accommodations and or customizations. Did you hear that? They had already done it. And so these focus groups were aimed at, and it happened here in Atlanta, Chicago, and Seattle. It was really aimed at saying, tell us what is working and what isn't. So for small employers, you'll see on that first result, customized employment is being creative and utilizing flexible approaches that meets the unmet needs of an employer. For both large and small employers, customized employment provides value in that it helps people be more productive. The third one, we think our language is so important. I tell people all the time, do not say customized employment, don't say supported employment. Talk about what you're going to offer. To employers, those two terms, CE and SE, are largely interchangeable and really irrelevant to them. They often talk about, in these focus groups from those 3 major cities and areas in the country, of employers that had already accommodated or customized, that our lingo and our language is off-putting, that they want us to be good listeners, and they love the idea of trying to help with unmet needs. That last bullet's really important too, because it has a lot to do with return to work. That type of customization can happen before or after. We all do it. And so these results and findings give us a clue to economics and support. You'll see that on the next slide, and we'll finish these. Joseph will send the employer focus group that brief out. Now, this is for my provider agencies, and I would say for GBRA. They had some advice here in the focus group around engaging employers effectively. So this is right at community rehabilitation providers, knowing the business, its products, its services, its customers, doing research before you show up. The kiss of death is showing up and saying, are you hiring? No, and the conversation is over. There are plenty of programs out there, guys, plenty of programs, but very few solutions. Be the solution. Understanding and addressing the needs of the business versus the need of the provider to place someone. Ouch, pretty direct, huh? Care about us, less about yourselves. Listening to the employer more than talking or selling. Listening. It's a good skill to have, by the way. And like any other skill, you must practice it. A good listener isn't scrolling on their phone. They're not selling, right? They're listening. That's why I don't like always be closing, because that makes it sound like cutthroat business when really it's about listening. Being creative and flexible about how to meet those unmet needs is really important. That's where creativity exists. I'm going to say this, and I've said it several times. Job descriptions were not handed down from the mount and inscribed in stone. We make up job descriptions. Human beings do. So all we're doing here is making up an additional job description. Okay? It's not something that somehow is never changed. Okay. I thought this was really interesting, the second to the last bullet, being passionate. Wait, these are all employers, bottom line, economics. People want to be led, and they want to know that you care about this issue and their business as much as they do. Passionate about the work of finding employment for folks with disabilities. If you can't find that passion every day, you got to make some decisions. Yeah, be passionate. Finally, being responsive and available to the employer when those needs and issues arise. I had an employer when I was in Rhode Island a few weeks back say, I think this part of human services is the best thing that's done across the board, because they're helping solve a problem, unemployment. They're creating a taxpayer. They're communicating to their customers that they're diverse and care. And at the very bottom line, they want part of that 68 billion of annual spending power. And there is nothing wrong with that, my friends, at all. All right, Joseph, I forget what the last slide is, but now I want to see it. All right. Next week are the employer-employee stories. But before we do that, I think Joseph, again, has put the tab for disability and economics in chat. What you saw today is available, plus lots of other work that we've done. And Joseph, if you can pull up the white paper that we did, I want to share this with these guys. It's also on the Advancing Employment tab for disability and economics. Real quick, there is a national TA center called DTAC, D-E-T-A-C, that we partner with. It's called Disability Employment Technical Assistance Center. It's in its second year of 5 years, and we do a lot with them here in Georgia. One of those things is we've authored a few white papers. And I don't want you to see the title of this one and somehow think, well, I don't work where Doug and Joseph and Tracy and Amy do, so this doesn't pertain to me. What we were asked to do was to provide advice around people new to this idea of communicating using economic tools. And while it's focused on a university setting, you'll see that we do spell out what everyone can do, and we'll get to that. Just real quick, it is a joint venture between TASH and the Lewin Group, which is a kind of a think tank in DC. Most of you probably know what TASH is. If not, you can Google that. And it's funded at Health and Human Services at something called the Administration on Community Living and the Administration on Disability. We're really fortunate to partner with them. And this paper, again, was advocacy around economics. So Joseph, you can go to that. I think it's the second page where we have the table. Yes. This is all we're going to cover. I would encourage you to download it from the Advancing Employment website, maybe use it in a staff meeting, even if you're just looking at this side-by-side comparison. Now, For the most part, we all engage in services advocacy. What do I mean by that? Well, funding, waiting lists, order of selection, some of those other things that are very human servicey. Yes, we must do that. We must do it. It's important advocacy work. But if that's all we do, hear me here, if that's all we advocate for our services and not economics, we're losing an entire audience. So think about the services advocacy, that column there on the left. That probably wouldn't mean much to any industry trade group, probably wouldn't mean much to a local employer, probably wouldn't mean much to an elected official at the city and county level. Doesn't mean it's wrong to do. It means that's the baseline and we know how to do that. What's that mean? Well, we focus on waiver slots, preserving the funding. We often, right, around legislative body days, we have letter writing, email blasts, calling our legislators, all very important. We do, though, sometimes fall into the trap of focusing on pity and loss and otherness and disempowerment. That's my only problem there, right? Because we're also trying to help people be included and participate in the workplace and have economic and social justice. Yes. Sometimes those outcomes on the service advocacy side are more provider related or family related, and often can lead to long-term segregation and facility-based programs. Most of the services that we advocate are professionalized under services advocacy. It's largely episodic and urgency-based. What do I mean by that? Well, again, spring comes around. Here are our top 3 legislative priorities. Everybody get busy, go to the day on the Capitol, and then the urgency is over and it's passed. We compare these in Exhibit 1 with economic advocacy, where we all can grow and collaborate. What did William Merritt Chase say? We are meant to be here together. So what do we focus on here? It's on return on investment, on purchasing power. That's a different message than please don't take our funding. Tasks include in economic advocacy, really pointing out and conveying diversity and equity and inclusion through employment. It's a very different way of thinking about and advocating for resources. The words we use instead of loss or funding or parading somebody in front of legislators to talk about how we can't cut their program, we focus on citizenship, inclusion, workers' rights, economic empowerment. It's a different message. These outcomes then, instead of being day programs or other types of configurations, the outcomes are employment and financial contributions to local communities. When someone goes to work, all work is important. All work is important. I will only put a little caveat there: if you're paid fairly and you're included. When someone goes to work, they're not only paying taxes on their income, they're paying taxes on sales. That's a big driver of our economic engine. The fourth to the last there, ongoing supports aren't just professionalized, they include natural and coworker-based approach. Amy Price has helped reach out to our Wisconsin friends. The last week of NDEAM in Georgia is focused on innovation, and we're having the Wisconsin folks tell us about a project where they are working with industry for coworkers to do the job coaching and receive stipends. The legislature there has tripled their funding to do that. Why? Because it's a better idea. Doesn't mean it's replacing provider-driven job coaching. It's an addition to, and at a time when we have a very huge shortage with direct support professionals, including job coaches, it makes sense. So please tune into that one. Finally, advocacy isn't a one-time deal, urgency-based. It's consistent and it's rooted in economics that are community specific. What we do in this white paper, Joseph, if you'll just scroll down to the next page, we start looking at how we teach ourselves within our disability network. We give examples. We talk about how you can teach economic development personnel about the economics related to disability. We give examples. We talk about how you inform legislative bodies and elected officials around economic advocacy, an example there as well. And then finally, we look at just the entirety of that and how do you convene around these issues of economics and disability. We take this one very seriously because it's our responsibility. We must use the university footprint to accomplish a lot of this. All right, so you can have access to that. Joseph, in our last few minutes here, Carter Center event is October 27th from 9:30 to noon. There will be a very light breakfast because of our budget, but we are excited about that. We have an agenda. Stacy and Cheryl Ann are going to help me recognize all of you. Again, it's going to be a recap of what we've done in October and looking forward so that we are celebrating this on a monthly basis, mostly through a facilitated hour around state as model employer. So we're going to use it. If anybody knows me, you know, we can't just have a celebration. We have to have a celebration and get some work done. So we'll look at that as it's related to state as model employer. So in these last few minutes, Joseph, Tracy, Amy, and others, I would love to hear from folks. What do you think we should focus on in 2023 related to economics and disability in Georgia? What would help you? Great, Vinay. How much does SSDI cap on employment income affect provider participation? I think we're talking about the employment networks there, I'm pretty sure. We record this, so we're going to keep these, put it in chat. Michael Adair, oh my goodness. If y'all don't know Michael Adair, you got to sell the service, the bottom line, not charity. One of the best job developers out there. Michael, thanks for participating. Okay, what else should we focus on? Vinay has said something. What else? What should we focus on related to economics and disability in Georgia that would help you get more folks to work? You may unmute or put in chat. Oh, you're so quiet. My goodness. All right, let's see what we got here.
I just added one in there, Doug, about just continuing to find ways to professionalize what it means to be a job coach or a job developer. More certifications or just ways to make people who are in that field want to stay in it and gain more skills.
I love it, Amy. Now they're coming in. Vinay, if I'm pronouncing that wrong, please tell me. Transition employment program for ticket to work participants. Julia says the success of an employee who wants to work will show up on time and be happy to be employed. Success stories really make a difference. Michael says, yes, Virginia has a great model for job fairs. Michael, I think we talked about this. I work with Virginia VR there. Juliet says, yes, work incentives, so important, but I would be remiss, even though we're going to celebrate this at the Carter Center. Miss Sharon DeMille from GVRA successfully shepherded a grant application for something called SWITSY, and that is sub-minimum wage to competitive integrated employment. If you want to hear about that and get more details on that, please join us at the Carter Center. Joseph needs to have an RSVP by Friday if you're attending. And I'll just say, to the question around, Juliet, around SSA work incentives. In that proposal was included something called DB 101 for Georgia. I won't go into it now, but please look up DB 101. And I think we're going to be on the right track there as well. Cheryl Ann just talks about the importance of elected officials understanding state as model employer and disability awareness. Teresa, you guys did such a great job last week in the candidates forum. Did such a great job. And you certainly know about entrepreneurship, just like Artie. So that's wonderful. And Amy just says more awareness for employers using those economic tools. Woo, what a group. I will promise you, we may not be able to answer all of those, but we will take these seriously and see how they can fit in. Tracy just says, stop thinking it's just nice for the public and officials, for folks with disabilities working. Joseph has put in the RSVP. Those slots are limited. Michael says sell the service to local chambers of commerce. Absolutely. By the way, the chambers of commerce several years back were the first ones to embrace the Disability Equality Index. And then Matthew says marketing tools to assist in economic advantages of hiring job seekers. Absolutely. Well, my friends, our time is up, and most of you know we don't hold you over, but we stay on, so that if you want to chat a little bit or just say hello, we'll do that. Please join us next week. Amy has got a wonderful webinar set up. It's always great. If you guys don't know Amy Price, Amy consults with Advancing Employment, but also runs her own provider agency, which gives her plenty of street cred. And we love having her here. Thank you, Toy. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.